Then further we will discuss about the postmodernist theories. In this case, you guys are going to talk about post-structuralism and post-colonialism. Of course, to make it easy for you, those who were in the afternoon session at 12 o'clock, we discussed the topic of postmodernism. You saw the types of questions that might come in the past papers. If you didn't manage to be there at 12, let's say it was almost 1 o'clock, then the session is recorded, so you could just have a look into what we discussed in the afternoon. We also have to, so you can see that both constructivism and postmodernism would focus mostly on the domestic level of analysis. So technically, you could link it to those domestic influences or to the actors that are active on the domestic level of analysis. So those would be the groups of interest, those would be political parties, ethnic groups, maybe somewhere NGOs as well. So you could just have a look for you for certain examples related to these two theories. And peace studies and gender theories fall somewhere between the domestic and individual level of analysis, mostly on the individual level of analysis. So for the gender theories, we are going to take the feminism, and we are also going to discuss about peace studies. As part of your revision notes, you'll find the topic of the topics that we're going to discuss today at page 13. Yes, page 14, sorry. So we are going to start with the Marxism. Two good sources to have an overview of Marxism would be the soft copies of the books that are uploaded on MS Teams. The Marxist theories are very well explained in Joshua Goldstein. If you want to have, let's say, a quick overview, or if you're struggling with the terms, with more sophisticated terms, then this book would be very handy for you. It's the vocabulary used in this book is really easy. Another good, let's say, another good source where you can read more about the theories of international relations with examples, with case studies, is Baylis, Owens, and Smith, Introduction to Global Politics. So in this case, you will have a little bit more sophisticated language that is used in there, and it's actually also you'll have plenty of case studies that you could integrate in your answers. So if we're talking about Marxism, first and foremost, as I mentioned before, Marxism is an interdisciplinary theory, and it focuses on differences between the classes. It focuses on topic of inequality at global level, and it also focuses on the topic of economic dependency. So from Marxist perspective, both realism and liberalism will serve the ruling class and will serve imperial interests. And you will have the situation where this interests are going to, let's say, the realism and liberalism will mainly explain the behavior of those powerful nations or powerful actors, and will attempt to give them valid reasoning behind their behavior. So if you're looking for any kind of criticisms for realism and liberalism, you can easily use Marxism as a theory that heavily criticizes most of the ideas promoted by the two theories. For Marxism, the most important feature of the world politics is that it takes place in a highly unequal world of capitalist economy, and in this world, the major actors are not states; the major actors are classes. This is why we integrate the Marxist theory as part of the social theory, and the behavior of all other actors is ultimately explicable by class forces themselves. So, in terms of the multinational corporations and intergovernmental organizations, Marxism also criticizes them and also would integrates them in that system of that capitalist or dominant system, and says that the multinational corporations and intergovernmental organizations also serve the interests of the world economic system. And in this case, Marxism mainly refers, if we're talking about intergovernmental organizations, Marxism mainly refers to the institutions or organizations created by the Bretton Woods system. And here we can integrate the International Monetary Fund. Here we are talking about the World Bank and also about the World Trade Organization. So, according to Marxism, these three organizations are actually meant not to support the development and reduction of inequality between the states, but it actually increases the dependency of the states towards those powerful nations. Um, so you could research more in terms of the Marxist view regarding the multinational and transnational corporations and intergovernmental organizations, and you're actually going to have actually going to find quite a lot of information on it. One website which I could recommend you to use as part of your revision and find more information about Marxism is eir.info. So another idea that is supported by the Marxism is that um, the world economy itself constrains the state's freedom of maneuver. And the world economy or the world capitalist economy especially or represents or builds up lots of constraints for the smaller and weaker states. So the Marxist perspective also tackles that idea of conflicts, and Marxism emphasizes that the world politics, um, rather than being a political or let's say a conflict over the national interest of the state, is actually more prone to the conflicts among classes or the conflicts among the let's say the Western views and the rest of the world. So if you want to explain any kind of conflicts of ideas that are occurring nowadays, or conflicts, even conflicts of interest or economic conflicts, you can actually refer to Marxism as well. In terms of sovereignty compared to realism and liberalism, Marxism does not really consider sovereignty as important. And the reason why they don't consider them as important is because they say that sovereignty only refers to the political and legal matters. And because Marxism mostly focuses on those economic relations, they argue that the most important for a particular state or political entity is to obtain the economic autonomy. So the more autonomous and economically particular state is, the better its position is in the world system. Um, some topics which you have to, or let's say some concepts which you have to grasp in terms of building up your answers would be the dependency theory. And we discussed dependency theory quite a lot in the second semester, in the first semester. So according to the Marxism, the world is divided in core and in um, the world is, well, say a certain society, a certain society is divided into, would have a base of their social develop there will be a base of the society, which will mainly include those economic, let's say, the production of material life, or the economic base, which would actually, depends on how stable it is, would allow the states to be independent and to develop further and to develop independent societies. And on the, as a superstructure, the let's say the society is going to have the legal, political, and cultural institutions. So any changes in the base, or any changes in that economic stability, will automatically lead to changes in legal, political, and cultural institutions. On the opposite, any changes in the superstructure, any fluctuations in the superstructure will affect the economic base, or will affect the base of the society. And therefore, the components, I would say one important component of the change, according to Marxism, is the class conflict. So, according to Marxism, the class conflict, or the class struggle, cannot be avoided, and it's something normal. And especially the class conflict, or the class struggle, is characteristic for the capitalist societies, right? Um, then the base superstructure scheme also can be integrated in the dependency theory, or actually it shows that dependence on that economic stability. So according to Marxism, let's say, as I mentioned before, if the states are not independent from the, we'll say, economically independent, they will actually have to follow the directives from the most powerful countries, and that would increase the inequality. As I mentioned before, and sometimes this issue, the question of class conflict or class struggle, comes a separate question in some of the past papers. According to Marxism, the class struggle cannot be avoided, and it's a normal characteristic of the society. It is especially characteristic for, as I mentioned, for the capitalist societies, and in this case, it actually presents the constant struggle between the bourgeoisie, or the capitalist, and the proletariat, or the workers. Well, if we are going to look into the class struggle as a global dimension, we could link it to the discrepancies, or the conflict between the major capitalist powers and the developing and underdeveloped countries that, let's say, would oppose this capitalist system. In a way or another, some people or some scholars view for example, the issue of terrorism as an explanation of this class struggle, or else, if you remember, when we discussed terrorism, if you remember, we said that mostly, I will say, the one of the main target of terrorism is to obtain political gains. Well, as part of your, let's say, as part of the um, as part of this idea of, or as part of the idea of political gains or economic gains, we could also link the topic of terrorism to Marxism, or we can explain it from the perspective of Marxism. Also, if you want to discuss, or if we want to have an example of class struggle, or say, give an example of the and link it, the class struggle, to a case study. You could also refer to the Arab Spring as an example of class struggle, as an example of uh, a certain group opposing the ruling class, right? So there are quite many things that you could include in here. We cannot talk about, like, for in the classic Marxism, we speak about socialist revolution. However, we cannot really talk about socialist revolution. For example, we cannot integrate Arab Spring into socialist revolution, but we can talk about Arab Spring as a social revolution, or as a struggle of the middle class, or let's say of particular countries or society or states against a corrupt ruling government, or against a ruling government that is not fully functionable, and it couldn't ensure the basic needs of that particular society. Um, Another concept that is related to Marxism is the concept of imperialism. So, and this is where we are actually shifting that view from the domestic to the global perspective. Historically, imperialism had, in Marxist theories, had different approaches. From Marx's perspective, for him, or let's say, Marx focused mostly on the impact and the role of the multinational and transnational corporations, and he viewed them as a form of expropriation, of a form of expropriation, or a form of controlling the resources in the, for example, in a colonial world. So, for instance, he viewed the colonial systems, or the build up of the colonial systems at the beginning of 20th century, as simply an attempt to expropriate those societies that were living there before. He also viewed the colonization as a process that led to dependency, for the simple reason that the societies that were living in under a particular metropolis did not really, let's say, were not really given that opportunity to develop, or else the access to the development they actually received was just enough for, let's say, for the gain of the metropolis, rather than the gain of the society that was colonized. So in this case, we could look into the current situation, for example, in most of the African countries, where during the colonial systems, certain groups or certain minorities were given more authority, and other minorities were just, let's say, left as outlaw groups, or they were left in a situation of underdevelopment. We can also have a look into this situation as certain metropolis, like, for example, Great Britain, let's say, giving more opportunities for, let's say, certain migrant minorities, like, for example, most of the colonies in Africa that were under the British Empire had lots of immigrants from India, right? So these particular groups were actually given a little bit more, let's say, were given more chances to, let's say, to develop. They were given better status in the society, and so on. So as soon as the colonies themselves collapsed, the let's say those revolutionary groups actually did not really have the right tools to build up independent societies, and they kept on being dependent on former metropolis. So if you want to have a little bit more, if you want to link more the topic of imperialism with decolonization, you have to return back to learning objective B3 and read. There is a slide that I shared with everyone, and there is also, as far as I remember, I've shared a file which also explains the process of decolonization and the problems that decolonization actually raised together with it. Um, Trotsky emphasized on the idea that the development of state is combined. The state needs to develop in a capitalist system of states in order to, let's say, Trotsky accepted the idea of capitalism. He didn't view it as bad as Marx. And he said, well, we do need to develop in a capitalist system of states. However, this development is always going to be uneven. So some states will always develop faster than other states. So this concept has been heavily criticized as part of the Marxist in Marxist schools, but in the same time, this idea has been later taken on board somehow by Wallerstein in his world system theory. So Lenin mostly focused on that idea of the socialist revolution, and he also tried to discuss the fact that imperialism would be considered as a last stage of capitalism, where the dominant core explores the less developed periphery, and this actually supports a lot the perspective that was shared earlier by Marx. And you could also, again, you could also link it to, if you want to explain, for example, the topic of globalization from the Marxist perspective, you could actually link it to the idea of promoted by Lenin. So more or less, in terms of Marxism, you guys need to have develop a particular viewpoints, or you need to be able to use these viewpoints as part of your answers. Any questions until now before I proceed again to the world system theory?
Not from me.
Mm-hmm.
No, miss.
All right. So another topic which we discussed a lot, and I think we mentioned it almost in every single lesson we've had in the second semester, was the world system theory. So in terms of world system theory, the theory itself was developed by Wallerstein somewhere in 50s, 60s. The main purpose for this for the development of this theory was to um, kind of find a solution to let's say to explain the discrepancies between the states, and to also give a valid explanation of reasons to create the intergovernmental organizations, like, for example, the United Nations. So according to Wallerstein, institutions and social world are continually being created and recreated. So the world system has a beginning and a particular end. So according to Wallerstein, let's say he in this way he actually attempted to explain like for example the World War One, or let's say the outcomes of World War One as an end of a system, or let's say end of system of empires. And he also tried, in this case, he also tried or attempted to explain that, well, after the World War One, the states have created that League of Nations as an institution or as an organization that could give a valid explanation of a new world order. The cycle, or say the development of this um, the development of this system created after World War One wasn't actually long. Towards 30s, we all saw that there were ideological discrepancies. There were technically three ideologies that were competing. That is the capitalist, fascist, and communist ideology, right? So the system actually ended as soon as the World War II started, right? So after the World War II, the international community has decided on creating a new world system based on the let's say having those organizations or agencies of United Nations having a new approach to international law and so on and so forth. So this actually explains the idea of Wallerstein that the world is created and recreated. So institutions will have a beginning and a particular end. He also if before most of the theories were talking about core and periphery, or let's say the from realist perspective, the core countries were those countries that were able to exercise the power, and the periphery were the rest of the countries that were mainly focused on survival, and that they wanted actually to just ensure their existence. From Marxist perspective, we saw it uh, that Marx and some other scholars were talking about the core and periphery as from the perspective of dependency, that those countries of the core or the capitalist countries would create that system that would serve their own interest and would exploit the periphery, or that was mainly at that point was mainly related to the so-called colonial world. Um, in 50s, 60s, the changes in the world system added up, or let's say, put the scholars in a situation where they had to change the approach, because we discussed about decolonization process, and we said the decolonization process had um, three three main um, phases, right? So the second phase started somewhere in 60s, or let's say almost mid of 60s, and continued until the Second Cold War. The decolonization process put Marxists in a situation where they had to give an explanation of those countries that couldn't fall couldn't fall in that concept of periphery, of being very weak and unsustainable states, and in the same time these states couldn't be integrated in the as part of the countries of the core, for the simple reason that they did not really respond to all the characteristics of the countries of the core. So this is why Wallerstein included that concept of semi-periphery. So for you guys, what do you have to remember, what you have to work on, and what you have to keep in mind when you explain the world system theory? You need to be able to explain or to give characteristics for each of these three uh, three groups of states, right? So first and foremost, the countries of the core will follow it, or let's say, will have a democratic government. They will be able to ensure high wages for their citizens. They will be those countries that will import raw materials and will export manufacturers. They will have a high level or a high potential for the to invest in the foreign markets, and they are going to also provide an excellent welfare service for their citizens. Furthermore, the countries of the core will control the countries of periphery and semi-periphery. So the countries of semi-periphery would respond to most of the characteristics of the countries of the core, with exception of that most of these countries will be, let's say, will have authoritarian governments. So that's one of the main reasons why they cannot be integrated as, or they cannot be part of the countries of the core. They will also, one added value of these countries is that they both import and export manufacturers and raw materials. So that allows them to concentrate their economic development, or to have a full control over that base of their economy. So they will actually be have a higher potential to avoid any kind of fluctuations or changes. On the other hand, some important features that would make these states less competitive and would actually threaten their social stability is the fact that they will usually have pay low wages for their citizens, and they will have poor welfare services, or let's say those welfare services are going to exist there, but they will either be only directed to certain groups in the society, or they will be of a poor quality. So there is something that the states have to still work on. The semi-periphery is going to be only dependent on the core, and is going to exploit, or have the tools to exploit, the periphery. So the last category of states is the periphery. The periphery depends both on the core and semi-periphery. Most of the failed or fragile states could be integrated in countries of periphery. These states will include non-democratic governments. They will export raw materials. They will import manufacturers. The wages are going to be very, very low, or they might be inexistent, and there will be no welfare services whatsoever. So that makes this kind of states very unstable, and that makes this kind of states um, prone to be controlled by the countries of the core and semi-periphery. In terms of examples, if you want to give examples of countries of the core, those would be UK, United States, those would be Germany, countries of semi-periphery, India, China, countries of periphery. You could mention here any country that has current conflicts on their territory, or countries that have severe economic issues. Like most of the countries in Africa can be classified as countries of periphery. The countries in the Middle East that are facing conflicts, such as Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, also can be classified as countries of periphery. So, is this clear, more or less? Yes, miss. No, miss. We're sleeping. We're hungry.
Yep.
All right. Um, So, if we're talking about the dependency school as part of the as part of the concepts related to Marxism. Dependency school is strongly related to the world system theory, and you could build up based on this dependency school. You could build a strong criticism to liberalism. Dependency school argues that the reasons for the global dependence, or the reasons for these countries of semi-periphery and periphery to depend on countries of the core, um, have, let's say, there are like several reasons for this. So first and foremost, they imply those declining terms of trade. According to the Marxists, the price of the manufactured goods will always be higher than the price of the raw materials. So because the countries of the periphery will always be dependent on manufactured goods, and they will only export they will only export raw materials. They will be always dependent on the countries of the core, and even the countries of the periphery. Dependency, the global dependency, is the monopoly of capitalism. The world itself is dominated by the countries of the core, exploiting less developed periphery. With the development of the core and periphery, there was no longer automatic harmony of interest between all workers, as claimed by Marx. Technically, let's say the middle class, or the poor masses, or the masses, or the poor masses in peripheral countries, technically have a little bit different visions or needs, rather than even the middle class, for example, in the core countries, because they have different, let's say, the needs themselves, they differ. And there is a different concept of what exactly poor means, for example, for someone that is living in the US with someone that is living, for instance, in Syria. The bourgeoisie in the core countries could use profits from exploiting the periphery and improve the lot of their own proletariat. And that actually also supports that idea that there is a different approach to what poor means for the richer countries and the poor countries. And therefore, the economic reliance on the raw materials in the periphery led to the fact that the countries of periphery became poorer relative to the countries of the core. So you could integrate the ideas related to dependency school in explanation of the issue of poverty, and so on and so forth. We would have discussed the world system theory and dependency school a lot in Module I. And again, I repeat that the Module I was reduced from the syllabus, but we had to discuss, I would say, if it would be part of the of the syllabus until now. We would have lots of examples to develop more ideas. Another concept developed by Marxism is Gramscianism. Gramscianism focuses on explanation of hegemony, and it emphasizes on the political and economic issues in the world politics. They argue that hegemony is being formed by the combination between the coercion and consent, or let's say the countries that are more powerful would have to impose their economic dominance to the countries of that are poorer, and the countries that are poorer will have to consent with this situation because they don't have the means to respond. By using consent, the hegemonic power is able to spread the culture, morals, and values, and any set of ideas and values must reflect a certain context. So if you refer to the American politics between 1990 to, I'll say, almost up to the rise of terrorism after the 9/11 attacks, you could see that they moral, let's say, some moral value or morals were actually kind of spread a lot around the world. That idea of democratization as part of the foreign policy propaganda, the soft power, civil society, ideas of human rights, all of those things are actually coming as part of a broader perspective or of a strategy of the US of how they actually saw the international system. In terms of the economic dominance, you could link the idea of hegemony with the topic of dollarization or the increase of the importance of dollar as an exchange currency in the international system. Gramscianism also reinforces that idea of the base superstructure model. So if you will ever try to apply Gramscianism or try to give an explanation of Gramscianism, you could use the base superstructure scheme or the base superstructure model as part of it. As examples, as I mentioned, you could return back to learning objective C3, if I'm not mistaken, and link it to, I would say, the idea of hegemony. You can link it to the US as a superpower. The Marxist perspective is quite broad, and as part of the Marxist perspective, we also have the critical theory. I think, as far as I remember, we kind of mentioned about the critical theory as part of the international law, where when we discussed about theories, there was something that was mentioning critical legal theories. So technically, critical theory was developed in 20s and 30s, but is also used nowadays to explain the issues of society, ethics, and security. So also, if in, for example, international security, it would actually come a little bit as an opposing opinion to the liberal approach to security, the human security, the collective goods problem, and so on. It also has, I would say, put forward the intellect concerns such as culture, bureaucracy, social concerns and concepts of reason, rationality of particular events. It also discusses the idea of the mass culture. So, for example, if you have to discuss, if you have to discuss a topic of globalization as part of your essays, you could apply the critical theory and explain the topic of the mass culture, right? So technically, critical theories somehow would support that Gramscianist idea that the hegemonic power is able to spread the culture, morals, and values on the global level. So, last but not the least, for Marxism is the new Marxism. New Marxism was developed, or let's say, had a lot of success towards 70s, 80s, and it technically returned back to the core Marx concepts and ideas. There are two major scholars who are actually supporting the new Marxist ideas, and that is Justin Rosenberg, who criticizes realism and globalization and tries to analyze the international system from the historical perspective. So he's would attempt to analyze the importance of the historical developments on why exactly, for example, certain societies actually ended up having a high incidence of conflicts, for instance. Then we have Beno Teschk. He criticizes all current IR theories, so he actually, let's say, brought up criticism to most of the theories of IR. So if you're still struggling with the criticisms for the theories, you can research around the ideas promoted by Beno Teschk, and you you could also look into his concept about the social property relation as a tool of analyze the key IR elements and transition between the two international systems. So in this case, you're going to look into the economic systems, you're going to look into the concept of the political economy developed by neoliberals. He's criticizing actually this concept of political economy, and he on that transition between the bipolar to multipolar world, or days of those countries of semi-periphery as an alternative to the old superpowers. Any questions? I have the feeling that you guys are sleeping.
Up, I'm here, miss.
Uh-huh. So it's only you who's left, everyone else left. All right, never mind. So I think, Mohammed, I'm gonna leave the other theories for Sunday. After the Eid, I think Eid is tomorrow, Friday and Saturday, right?
Yes, it begins tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's until Saturday, though.
So I'm going to